Welcome to Office Hours, everyone. Here we are, late summer, discussing Doom, VR, and other such exciting things. But anyhow, welcome to Office Hours. Let's see. Agenda, announcements. Probably the big thing is we're all trying to get to 5.0. You all know that, but that's where we are. I don't see much else for announcements. Questions, issues, PRs people want to discuss. I'm gonna, pause for a moment in case a random community member would like to ask any questions. Yeah. So there's actually probably a couple PRs that are maybe worth having a look at. One of them that I wrote down is I finally got around to moving all of my HackMD minutes over to Git, and there's a PR with like a year of them. I would need a foundation approval on it because it's the foundation repo. So I don't know if Alessandro or Zach wants to thumb it. You could proofread it, or you could just thumb it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll thumb it for you there.
It was a little too many for me to reflow and reformat, but I thought better to get them into Git and stop delaying on that. I saw a bunch of PRs come by from Puffy Sid, and I know he's been sort of trying to get a couple of his things merged. Maybe he's got one on the binary format stuff. The other Mako reader thing. Anyhow, yeah, the Leaf one.
Leaf.
So if some of the C folk could take a look at those or think about them, that'd be great. He seems like a pretty nice guy, so I kind of feel bad about letting all that hang for a while. So it might be good to review those before 5.0.
Oh, nice find about the CFB library from Microsoft. We should migrate to that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was the right thing, but the internet gave it to me, and I was like, "This looks right."
Yeah, that's actually perfect. Yeah, because that request is merging 3 different formats together. Mm-hmm. We have the compound file binary format, which is like a FAT system, and we have on top of it the OLE, which defines which streams you can get, and on top of that we have the specifications for the link, or rather the jump list format. So ideally, we would use 2 different libraries to build this. One of them is the one you have found. And as you might have guessed, that particular format is super hostile. It's like exploited quite easily.
So there's an interesting, one of the things that's, I think that's come up in the past is the idea that for doing certain classes of untrusted network operations, it would be nice to drop permissions and then do a thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have any code to do that, but like every now and again, we encounter these things. It would be nice to do that.
Yeah.
We had one dropper for reading arbitrary files, but didn't really work all that well. So I think Teddy ended up removing it, if I remember correctly. I think the function or the API was drop2. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I thought we had it still in the code base, and it was used so that you don't accidentally change system state. So let's assume that, for example, the deb or RPM library you're using tends to change data. We don't want that, so we drop privileges before we call those functions. But yeah, that's not a
thing. It's not forensically safe though. That's what.
It's
still.
We also had the forensic grid file. Hopefully, if it is still there, we will nuke it soon. But
does drop2 work on Windows?
I'm not sure, but
I think it's POSIX-ish.
Yeah, but the major problem is that we always expect to go back to admin when we drop. So we drop, we call the RPM code, and then we restore the regional permissions, and this prevents it from being useful for security.
Well, but I could imagine that we ingest some sketchy data and then cast it to some strings and then we return to other. Like I don't know how to handle that boundary, but like that model sounds workable to me.
The problem is that if Osquery can revert back to permissions, so does the exploit.
Yeah.
So the only boundary there we can set is we could like fork, drop the privileges, and then the fork process will do the work for us. Sandbox, we can also apply username spacing, for example, send back the data, and then kill the process.
Sounds like a development project.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's the first time we've really talked about it, but maybe we'll want it in the future, so maybe someday we'll do something.
It will be similar to what the namespace, the container querying is doing.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. Because that's Stefano. With that, you fork a process, and then there's like they communicate over JSON or something.
They communicate. Well, yeah, it is sending JSON as we normally do, but it is doing through a pipe between processes.
Right.
And though there are a couple of things around how you handle the process. So if you create it each time, because there are performance issues when you maybe are joining that table against another table, and then that means that for every row of the other table, you will get a generate call, and every generate you are creating a new process to do the query. And so I have added actually logic to keep the process open and receive requests. But then you have to carefully think about how the watchdog sees all of this. What happens if the new process hangs? And currently, to be sure, the process is always created as it is configured by default right now. There is a flag we can change to do that, but the problem is that the watchdog, I think, it's not aware enough, especially if it hangs. It is not aware enough to handle that. So anyway, there are several issues to be solved. Yeah.
You mentioned being called every generate. That's because we're eponymous. We're ephemeral tables, right?
No, that's because every new query can specifically in that case, any new query can change which container it has to query. So you have to switch container.
And we have this crazy constraint that you cannot join a namespace if you already have more than one thread.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reason why we are forking. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all okay.
Well, and it's because the like SQLite query execution will do like the nested loop thing where it generates all the results for one table, and then to do the join, it calls the generate with all the different parameters. And it might be that for each row that needs to be joined, we need to, the generate function gets called, and then that causes the exact, which might be necessary as well if every row that needs to be generated is for a different namespace. Or at least we need to fork a process for every namespace, right? It's just the only optimization we can get is that if we have multiple calls for the same namespace, then we don't have to do multiple forks for that, right?
So, okay, maybe not really. Maybe I did not explain it. Actually, I might have messed up the explanation earlier. No, so there is a way to switch. So currently, it's actually jumping in the namespace you target and then getting out of it. So going back to the original namespace. So it is possible. It is possible to switch from namespace to namespace. By default, now it's creating new processes to be a little more sure about that process not hang, etc., etc. So that you know that one query, that process has to return after one query. And though the process is created around the generate, because there you are receiving the constraints, which is the namespace ID, which might change every query. So that's like the hook point for getting the namespace ID and forking.
Speaking of namespaces, we have a PR to, quote, support PID with namespace and more tables.
Yeah, I have to, to find some time to look into that again. Yeah, there. So I don't know if there's anything specifically to discuss. So in that PR, the main issue and the issue I was facing when preparing originally the namespace feature was that the Osquery library core would use the glog, to log onto file system or to TLS, etc. Well, sorry, no, on the file system or standard out. And the problem is that glog is something that uses threads, might have some global state because it is initialized in a global environment. And this is an issue when you are going to, so if you are creating a new process which only has one thread, you don't know in which state the various mutex is for the Google log, in which state they were, basically. And if you are going to call from the fork process Google log, you would most likely risk a deadlock. So we created, again, we are instead sending the logs through the pipe as JSON. But then this means that we have APIs that table use, like read file, that were using those, we're using Google log. So technically, I would have liked that we removed any logging from APIs. So basically, APIs have to be generic, and they return a status that then the caller has the job to log if interested in. Because otherwise there is these additional dependencies on the.
That feels like, I mean, as someone who writes tables, that feels like a really big change, because I usually end up littering my tables with log debug statements so I can understand what's happening under the hood. So I don't know if there's a way to expose a different library interface for that, or.
So well, currently the PR author has added a parameter to the read file function, so that basically by default it is still logging through glog, and then in the cases where you have a table that has been imported, then that is set to false and it won't use that.
So
that then will create the fact that those tables will not log anymore. So yeah, anyway.
Back when you first made the PID with namespace thing, we sort of talked about whether it made sense to create some larger abstraction versus porting a lot of individual tables. And we kind of just did the couple of tables and deferred larger abstraction questions.
Yeah.
So this PR goes through and manually adds a bunch more tables. And maybe a question for us is, do we want that, or do we want to basically not merge this PR in favor of trying to come up with a real abstraction? I think I'm in favor of just taking the PR, because I don't think we've got a good answer for an abstraction, but curious what others think.
Well, there are, sorry, just to clarify, there are two kind of abstractions we are talking about here. So there is the abstraction that is necessary, there's no way around it, for the logging and for anything in your Osquery APIs that uses something that can cause a deadlock or some global state. And that is, again, a must. And then you have, I think what we actually were talking about is the abstraction of not having to add some code which is also sort of equal for every table, like the check for has namespace constraint, etc. So to automate, let's say, that part. And yes, that is one thing. But the real meat of the issue is actually going through the table and validate that they are able to work correctly inside, well, with this new logic and inside the container. So there are two different words there.
I guess the ideal abstraction would be to have the tables built against a library that provides functions that we know will always work regardless of where this fork originated. So in practical issues, let's say that when the generate happens, we fork and we inherit memory from the parent process, and in this memory we have things that are locked or global state, which could happen from it could come from any library, really, like OpenSSL or Boast, everything. If that memory is in the wrong state, the fork process will not work. So yeah, I guess the real abstraction here would be to completely detach the tables and provide like a stateless read file, for example, that is then linked by both the Osquery core and the tables. So it requires some work. And we also had, I believe, another pull request that tried to introduce namespace support through command line parameters. And the reason it wasn't merged is the same, because there is no strong guarantee that those queries will keep working correctly without hanging when we move from one part of the code and we happen to fork to handle the query.
Maybe let me ask what I'm trying to get to is, is this PR something we want? Does this PR further the state of what we're doing, or does it sort of create roadblocks for future abstractions?
So Stefano maybe can explain more in more details, but as I recall, it was introducing some uncertainties based on how it was coded. But the final goal is interesting and something we would like to have.
Okay, so broadly speaking, we want the PR, and then it's an implementation and like just code review question. There's no deeper. Okay. Great. Let's see. Next thing I have on my agenda is 5.0, but I actually maybe want to bounce to the structured logging thing from Zach, because I think the big 5.0 questions are mostly between Mac people who mostly aren't here. So I don't know. What do you want to talk about structured logging? You want to talk about 5.0?
I'm happy to talk about the structured logging. It can maybe be quicker too, and then we can use the remaining time to talk about 5.0. I think if y'all are looking at the meeting notes, basically I put an example of an Osquery log in here. We use this kind of unstructured text thing to indicate that results are coming from a pack and which query. And it strikes me as just like more difficult to deal with than necessary. And so I'm interested in possibly as a breaking change for 5.0, switching it so that the name, query name and the pack name are separate, or maybe just adding fields that separate those, because there are some obstacles towards being able to properly parse this unstructured data right now. So wondering what folks think about that.
Off the top of my head, I think it will be better received if we add it as a non-breaking change and then maybe eventually deprecate the old field.
Yeah.
Partly, like, I'm not worried about my employer and I'm not worried about your employer, but I think the install base of Osquery and the number of people with like random grotty Splunk rule sets is just very large. So yeah. I'm kind of like, and I mean, I don't really share your pain. I'm like, you could write your pack names so you can parse this more cleanly, but I agree, it's not very structured. So I'm always in favor of more structured logging. I forget, can't we nest packs? Like, can't we have more nesting? And how does that affect your proposal?
I'm not aware of how we can have more nesting of packs.
Maybe we can. I'm very fuzzy on the actual allowed OS query syntax because it is horrific and blurry, and like the query syntax in like location A is like 90% the same as location B, but differs around the edges. Like I keep wanting to make a schema file for the mess of it, and I've never done that. So I'm not sure actually if we can nest arbitrarily or if like you get one nesting layer.
Yeah. I think, and it sounds like it's definitely worth looking into, but I think you can either schedule queries at like the global schedule level, like under the schedule key and the config, or you can have queries in packs. And those packs can either be loaded from separate files, or they can be defined within the config. But I think either way, it's only one level, but that's something I can look into and verify. So I guess I see your point as well. And recently with Fleet, we had a major version release and we made some breaking changes that were like specified in the breaking changes section of the release notes. And we've been getting a lot of people coming in like, hey, this thing's broken. Like, I didn't find this in the release notes. And it's like, all right. I mean, the better we can make the transition for people, the happier people will be. So if folks are not opposed to potentially duplicating this information in the logs in order to achieve the goal of making it more structured and not breaking things, then to me, that's a fine outcome.
I feel fine duplicating it. If you want to get fancy, you could make a configuration script, a configuration option to include the old log or not, the old name or not. I'm okay with the shaking head there too.
I mean, I can do that, but I know we've talked often about there's too many configuration options in Osquery, so my instinct is let's try not to do that.
I shoved a note down there a while ago. I filed a ticket wishing that our status logs were more structured. And yeah. I don't know, now that you've talked about this, it's not really related, and I don't know if it's easy, but like our status logs are very, very hard to correlate back to a query.
Yes, this is something that I've often wished for sure, is for it to be easier to understand like what query was executing or what caused a log to be generated.
Yeah, like in Golang, I would just be like, our context object should decorate the logs and we'd be done. But I don't know if we have anything like a context object here. So
Yeah, and we do things like write into rockcb the name of the query that's currently executing, so that if the watchdog kills the worker, then we can detect what was executing. So like there's some precedent for having that kind of state available, but I think there are also multiple threads running, and so it might not be easy to be sure that what is logging is even related to the query being executed, and it's not like the an event-based table is receiving events or something like that.
I feel like this is the kind of thing that some bit of shared memory should work with, right? And I don't understand how. I'm not enough of a C person, right? But like at some level, there's a thing which has which is running in a thread doing a thing, and ultimately some part of that thing calls a logging function. So there should be a shared address space here that we should be able
Yeah.
to do something clever. Maybe it ties back to the PID with
there is.
namespace, and if we make a better logging abstraction, we can.
Yeah, I would love to address this 7037 further, because I think this could really improve the operational experience for folks. But this looks like at least medium difficulty. Whereas my proposed change here is like, I think I can put up a PR and it'll take longer to build the new version of Osquery than to write the code.
I would review a PR with your change and presumably approve it. That sounds simple and reasonable to me.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thanks for chatting about that. I'm happy to chat about logging more, but I know there are other things that folks wanted to chat about. So
your logging thing was faster than I thought. So of course, the big thing happening right now is the state of 5.0. The really big thing happening in 5.0 is the change to the .app bundle for macOS. Thank you, Charvel, for the huge amount of coding work. I tested it a few days ago this weekend, and it did not work right. And there has been discussion online, and we're fixing it. If people sorry, go on.
So, yeah, just to like catch everyone up if they're not following along. So App Bundle is at this point a necessity on macOS, especially for endpoint security related event tables. And the current question is shipping an App Bundle. And now, thanks to self-testing, we figured out that we are code signing the binary, but not code signing the App Bundle. And code signing the App Bundle is a requirement.
Here, let me rewind slightly. For those of you that have not been paying attention to the 5.0 endpoint security code signing mess, perhaps anyone following along at home, the core gist of all of this is that to support endpoint security, we have to sign the macOS binary with a provisioning profile alongside it. Charvel's maybe correcting my words. But
you need to sign the binary with an entitlement.
Thank you.
Provisioning
That's
profile alongside with
the
App Bundle.
Yeah. And the supported way to do that is to shove that all into an app bundle. An app bundle is that little fancy thing that you can double click in the Finder, and under the hood, it's really just a directory with an info.plist file in it. So it's pretty straightforward. The thing we had thought we could do was to sign the Mako binary and then build that into a .app bundle. And the thing that we found is that if we do that, that renders the signature invalid, because there's some very weird stuff in OS X, which I can only report what it does, which is that like if you sign a binary and then you stick it into a .app thing, you can still run the binary, but macOS says like, whoa, these signatures don't look right. Because the code signing path is like seeing that you're looking at a .app bundle and it's treating it a little differently. So what we should be doing is we should be building the .app bundle and then signing that en masse and then distributing it as a .app bundle, which has all of the things you need. The only downside to this is that you cannot extract the Mako binary and have it have a valid code signature. So if you sign the .app bundle, and then you come along and you're like, oh, I don't need any of that endpoint security. I'm just going to pluck the Osquery D binary out of the middle of that. You will have an Osquery D binary with an invalid signature. So the question for us as a project now is we need to distribute the .app bundle. That's kind of what we decided. And then we could additionally distribute a bare Mach-O binary, or we could not. And on one side, there's flexibility. I'm not sure how many people need bare Mach-O binaries. And on the other side, there's simplicity. I think from our build standpoint, it's very simple either way. So it's kind of just about like options on a download screen and like end user confusion.
And all the work to like support either or both has been done. There are like 3 PRs up. So I think like Seth mentioned, we just need to decide what we want to do and then, change one line in one of the PR.
Yeah, this is all like shell move file X to location Y nonsense. So nothing real hard.
Got it. And to make sure that I understand, you're saying that you cannot sign both. You cannot sign the binary and then put it into the app bundle and then sign the app bundle and have things work?
It overwrites the signature on the Mach-O in the middle.
Okay.
So you can.
but it doesn't do anything. Got it.
So this is potentially. I was going to say this may actually matter to you, Zach, and it matters a little bit to me because I haven't looked through Orbit recently. But the way Launcher works is by distributing bare Osquery D binaries, and I think that's how Orbit works too. So if we sign app bundles, then that means that you and I will have to re-sign the Osquery D binary with our own keys. And if Osquery distributes a bare Mach-O binary, while we won't have to re-sign it, it won't work with endpoint security.
Yeah.
Or, of course, we upgrade our agents to actually ship the .app. But
from my perspective, it's going to be a pain, but I'm probably going to do the latter.
I mean, I'll do the latter. I just might not do it this month.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the immediate move might be to sign it ourselves. I'll say from my perspective, representing Fleet and what we're trying to do with Orbit, I don't need the Osquery project to ship the plain binary separately. I think I can make it work.
I mean, I'll say that like as Collide, I have my own code signing keys, so like I can handle either one of these.
Yeah.
And I imagine you're in the same place of like you can sign whatever you need to sign.
Yeah, we have keys. We can sign it. And so it's not a big problem for me. So I mean, my instinct is that we should just ship the app bundle, assuming, because we've never offered a plain binary option on Mac OS, right? It's always been the .pkg. So it's always like, so can the PKG, I see hand waving, the PKG can put a symlink in so that you can run the binary inside the app bundle?
It does.
To me, that seems fine.
I want to push back ever so slightly on that, which is that while we have always distributed a PKG, a variety of end users and vendors have just pulled the PKG apart to get at the bare binary inside. That's a very common pattern because the PKG is ultimately just basically a tar file. So
yeah.
But I've also had large people who deployed via MDM, and they prefer PKG, like most of the Mac admins community.
But are we even shipping the correct kind of PKG for them?
So it's a flat PKG, right? And to convert it to a distribution PKG, either your MDM does that on the fly, simple MDM does that.
Oh no, this one is messy. So this is a thing we should fix.
Is this a 5.0 blocker fix or
Nah.
okay?
Nah. So yes, there are two kinds of PKGs.
Component and the distribution.
I forget their
or-
names.
yeah.
Sure, flatten distribution. MDMs can only distribute the distribution ones, not the flat ones. We ship a flat PKG, and that means anyone who wants to distribute Osquery by PKG has to convert and re-sign it, which invalidates our signatures. So they also have to then re-sign it. So a thing we should do is at some point we should convert over to generating distribution PKGs and signing them, because there is no reason to prefer a flat PKG. A million years ago, I PR'd this and Teddy blocked it for maybe totally unrelated reasons. And it's kind of languished in the background, and now we should fix it. But I don't think we have to fix that for a 5.0. It's not a blocking, it's not a breaking change. I just sort of say it so that everyone maybe has a stance on that. You know, as we talk about this, I might have a slight preference for the Osquery project shipping the Mako binary. Because even though I can re-sign it and Zach can re-sign it as he needs,
some other folks will be able to do.
No, I'm starting to feel a little bit annoyed that there are some other vendors that seem to be claiming to ship stock Osquery D that ship heavily modified ones. So I'm kind of like, you know, so the more that like Zach and I can choose to ship Osquery signed things makes me happier. Because there are absolutely vendors who are shipping heavily modified Osquery and claiming that it is stock Osquery.
Yeah, and we get those. We've started getting support requests for those things in Osquery Slack. So I'm on board with that, and I'm glad to hear that it won't introduce much pain for the Osquery project immediately. But I do worry a bit about going forward. How do we communicate to users and operators the differing capabilities of the binary versus the app?
So we have been a little bit proactive on this, kind of putting messages out in Mac admins, and there's also kind of a reference issue that this is kind of going to be a breaking change with 5.0.
I'd also maybe go a little further and say, I don't think we should advertise the bare Mako binary. Like, it shouldn't be the PKG. It shouldn't be the main macOS download. It should kind of just be shoved off on the side on the GitHub, you know, the giant pile of GitHub releases. And like, if you want to download that, maybe you should know what you're doing.
Okay, so to back up, we are just going to ship a .app bundle.
In the PKG.
In the PKG.
Yeah, like moving away from the PKG also makes sense, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think for 5.0, the premier macOS download should probably be something
PKG
that installs to opt Osquery, has the .app thing, and is a PKG. And I can pretty easily imagine dropping the PKG if we move everything into an app bundle in the future. And I think we should also include in the giant GitHub release downloads just a straight Mako binary that's been tarred. And I think we could probably even omit all of the lenses and extraneous fluff that comes with that. Like, it's kind of there a little bit like the debugging builds of like, if you want to use this bare thing here, you probably should know what you're doing. It's not a full release. I see Zach nodding. He's like, oh yeah, that would be useful. Unless that's what I would use.
Yeah, it would be useful. And the scenario that I don't want to end up in is like a year from now, people are shipping that thing, and then people are using Osquery and going like, some of these features mysteriously don't work. What's going on here? So as long as whatever we do makes sure that the default path is that people are shipping that app bundle, I think then we're good.
Yeah. And just to clarify, like a binary by itself, the endpoint security wouldn't work. You'll need a provisioning certificate. The whole reason we are doing the stance is Yeah.
I see this a little bit as a self-serving bridge in that it lets me keep shipping it until I migrate to the app. It lets Zach do the same thing. It lets any other vendors who are doing that and still be able to be like, look, this is the straight Osquery one. We'll check the SIGs, you know.
Yeah,
So,
and maybe we can announce in the release that we're still shipping the plain binary as of now with the signatures, but that it's intended to phase that out as we move further into 5.0 and folks have a chance to migrate.
I'm happy to. I'll try and remember to write that into changelog. Things. Feel free to remind me should I forget.
Yeah,
I'm anticipating the 508 channel log to have a pretty big leading breaking changes section.
no doubt.
The other sort of related is I would really like a end-to-end package from a CI which is code signed. Could we do that just so that it instills some confidence that code signing is working correctly, the gatekeeper thingy works great?
As soon as we merge your PRs, we can do that.
Okay. Would you have some time to review?
They were blocked on this conversation.
Yeah. No, the other one, not the code sign one, the 7236 and the
I'll look at
PR.
them all. They're all. I think
Okay.
they're all together in my head because, like, as we
Okay.
decide the paths that things land on, it's going to have to trickle back into that, right? Because, like, right now you're dropping a bare Osquery binary into opt Osquery bin Osquery D, but we shouldn't do that. We should, like, it has. Anyhow, I'll talk in the PRs. They're all a little tangled together.
Okay.
And then, yes, we can absolutely go through a CI code sign build before we cut 5.0. That was how I generated the 4.9 ones. I think I shared like some hideous Amazon URL somewhere in Quora for those. They just didn't work because we were code signing wrong. So as soon as we get all of this merged, like one of us can go through and click the code signing buttons to generate a 4.9 dash SHA.
36, yeah. Or
It'll include the git SHAs. And those won't work for Windows and Linux, but they will work for macOS. And if we have problems, we'll make more PRs.
Yeah. I have some more time this week, and I'd kind of like to make more progress and reach a state where things kind of fall in place. So if you can help out with code reviews, that would be awesome. And the other thing is, are there any other 5.0 blockers, Windows certificates, and anything else that I can help out with?
I think we should try and move the Linux paths too.
Okay.
Anyone disagree? Agree?
Move the Linux paths, as in get that done?
Seems easy-ish.
Sure.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, it should be easy. So it maybe not necessarily blocker, just maybe nice to have it since we call 5.0 as the release with breaking changes. But yeah, maybe let's remind that it is not necessarily blocking.
I mean, just seem. I guess Linux people have a little bit more
but it's
like.
easy.
Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like we should do that.
Mm-hmm.
Windows code signing is still blocked on hideous legal things that I haven't picked up recently. But I think we've also, I don't know that may not be as strict a requirement. Like I think we decided we could let that slide if we needed to. Because unlike macOS, I don't think Windows MDM users have things certificate pinned. So although that's not totally true, I do know some Carbon Black users that have things certificate pinned to Nix code signing cert. But you know, they're vastly fewer than the macOS inits. Yeah, I'd love to get the Linux one in, and we were chatting about whether to move stuff out of var, but that's not blocking. I think we should do it, but we don't have to be blocked on it. Yeah.
So-
Charvel, I forget. Do you have can you click the buttons in the code signing repo? You
I
can
have
make-
to rely on other people mostly.
Okay, because you can make PRs there. So I didn't remember if you could
I'll-
run the workflows.
Oh, the code sign repo. Yeah, I can run the workflow, but
So then you can generate signed
else.
releases.
okay. Can I?
Yes.
Sure. Okay.
That's all the magic. It's right there.
Yeah.
If you run that workflow, you can run it off of a test branch, and it'll generate signed binaries.
Yeah. I meant like getting the app bundle PRs and the packaging repo PR in so that I can do that.
Yeah. I'll try and get those reviewed. I was mostly waiting on us resolving file system paths. But yeah, you can generate signed releases using that workflow.
I won't abuse it.
Yeah. And there's a little blog post note down at the bottom here.
Yeah, that's the article I've written about BPF. Hopefully, it is going to become useful if people want to contribute BPF code to Osquery.
Oh, neat. Thanks. Okay, well, anything else people want to chat about?
Yeah, let's talk about CI. So, speaking about the possible M1 port Apple Silicon, how do we deal with the CI? Easiest way, we have the list of the guarantees. We implement cross-compilation on Intel. We use the existing infrastructure we have on GitHub Actions, and we can at least ensure that at all times the M1 build is always working fine. We have no idea whether the binaries we've built are working, but that's better than nothing, I guess. The ideal outcome is we find a service that supports M1, and we can somehow pay for it, or find an open source offering that lets us have it for free or Osquery.
I think I forgot to mention this before, but Mac Stadium has been generous. Like if you are a legit open source project in a community, they usually donate some M1 compute time.
Perfect. The miracle did happen.
And I don't quite remember like how exactly the Graviton thing works for Linux, the AWS instances.
Oh, I do.
AWS also has M1 instances now, though it's kind of a reserved instance, so you need to reserve it for at least 24 hours, and it's expensive. But I'm not sure if AWS gives credits or not to open source projects.
Yeah, my fallback plan was to contact who is currently donating the AWS instance.
So, there are two M1. There are two CI problems, and they're thought of somewhat in tandem. And I say this based on our experience with the Arch64 port. One of them is how we manage the agent itself. So a very long time ago, I had thought that we could run the GitHub agent usefully on our own hardware. And after actually trying to do it, I concluded that that was not really a good idea. And this boils down to the security boundaries that it's been written to assume. That might change. I keep seeing activity on the relevant GitHub bug reports. But as of now, the GitHub agent assumes that you are only running trusted code on the CI platform. So there's no allowance, there's no affordance for like spin up a VM, run this, destroy the VM, and go on with life. The way we're handling that for Arch 64 is we only run the builds after a merge on master. So we're not actually vetting CI on Arch 64. We are sort of saying, well, if the code looks safe and it passes on the other platforms, it's probably good and we can merge it, and then we'll build it off master, and that's like good enough. And it's probably a good enough Band-Aid, even if it's not ideal. And then Amazon has donated a fairly substantial amount of money to us, which we will need to redo every year because the credits expire every year. Amazon's pretty friendly towards open source projects. So I think with the M1 thing, we'd probably end up having to do something very similar. Either there'll be ephemeral runner support, in which case, cool, we can figure out some ephemerality, or there won't be ephemeral runner support, in which case we'll have to build post-merge to master. And I think those are our only real options right now, unless we investigate alternate CI systems.
Yeah, I was aiming for that exactly. The same thing we have for ARM.
At this point, I'm sort of tempted to look into alternate CI systems, but I kind of don't want to deal with that. What is Bitrise?
It's kind of a
nice.
CI dedicated for iOS and macOS CI.
Yeah, they do not have M1 support yet, though. That's the only trouble. Also, last time I tried to use it, it choked on the amount of output we had on Osquery. Like, I don't think it is too much, but for some reason...
Osquery is a very painful build.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, but it's not like printing so much stuff that, you know, it should be able to handle it.
Wait, printing, what you mean with that?
As far as I remember, it was choking on the amount of output that the build was producing. And so there is this weird initial discovery phase where you input your repository, and there is no way to skip it. And so there was too much output. It wasn't able to like conclude the analysis, and I was never able to go to the next step. Because they do have an open source offering, and it was interesting as they usually have the very latest updates on Xcode and macOS like the day after they are released by Apple. It is super up to date.
So we are talking about text output.
Yeah.
Like from CMake, which is weird because, I mean, it's pretty standard. It's not that Osquery has anything.
Osquery has a lot of it. The thing is, in Osquery, you're building the AWS SDK and like 17,000 other things, right? It's probably like it's probably like 10 megabytes of output, and it's overwhelming some memory buffer somewhere.
I mean, I don't know. There are many big projects. I mean, if we were actually like printing additional things beyond the line that I'm compiling this specific file, I would understand that. But I mean, also I would understand maybe if you were compiling with verbose active, then yes, because we have quite a long command line there. So with many include directories. But otherwise, if you are using something that is compact, well, the compact compilation output, I don't see why. I mean,
yeah, maybe it was a bug, and we can try again.
Yeah,
provided
well, if they don't support M1s, it doesn't matter right now.
Yeah, that was my understanding. If they ever decide to support for it, then we can try to use it.
I mean, so I think Trail of Bits, you've started being interested in an M1 port. Is that something that y'all are actually starting to make progress on? Like, I'm excited if it happens, but I'm wondering if getting too deep into the CI weeds is like putting a cart before the horse.
We are still in the discovery phase and evaluating the different things. So we checked. We're checking on the amount of work we would have to do if it happens. And we were at the last phase, which is CI. I mean, it wouldn't be really helpful to do the work if we cannot have some way to keep it in good state without causing a burden.
I think that's actually something we have to have.
So we'll find a way. Like, we have to solve this. It would be great to have proper M1 support and figure out how to do that. And I just don't know quite how yet. And I have a sneaky suspicion that we should really look at abandoning GitHub's actions. Especially like the number of platforms we have is increasing faster than GitHub seems to be doing anything.
Well, hopefully GitHub Actions will introduce M1 sooner or later. Like, it's the future. There's no way for them to escape it.
I am so skeptical that they will ever support M1s.
Do we have a contact at GitHub who could provide a clue, or?
I don't have anyone I trust an answer from at GitHub. But, they haven't supported Arch64, and that's been a couple of years now. Fundamentally, GitHub is part of Azure, so, is AWS's and Apple's custom processors on the Azure roadmap?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I'm looking at this. I think a more likely route is that we'll actually be able to see ephemeral runners from GitHub, and then we can run our own ephemeral runners, and that would give us the ability to host our own GitHub runners, which would be nice. But having actually looked at the GitHub runner code, I have no confidence in that code base. It's the giant fucking pile of .NET garbage.
Yeah. I remember you were enthusiastic about it.
Is this what they call the self-hosted runner, or is this different?
Self-hosted runners, yeah.
Okay.
So right now, status quo is that you cannot securely run public code on a self-hosted runner, because the self-hosted runners use a slightly different code path than the GitHub hosted ones, and they don't have any way to be ephemeral or reset machine state. And if you try, you can run into all kinds of weird race conditions. There is a PR open, maybe just merged, that is pushing 2 years old from GitHub to fix this problem. So there's a little bit of action on it now, but it's been languishing for years. Several of the other CI entities, like GitLab's Actions competitor, seems to have a much better code and much better self-hosted runner code base. But, change in CI is always a little scary.
Do you happen to check out what was the name, code build, the one from Amazon?
I did. I even got it working.
Nice.
And then I dropped all that on the floor. Code build looks fine. We could absolutely convert over to using it, and it will have its own. This is true for all of them, right? We could use it. It would probably be mostly fine. We'd probably be really annoyed around the edges at some things. We'd have to work through how all of the callbacks and uploads work, but it's all sort of tractable work for us. It's just a lot of DevOps and SRE nonsense. But I think I actually got an Arch64 build through code build, and it worked.
Is it written in something that can work on M1?
I don't know.
My dream is being able to use custom images so that you can test. So, I mean, I know it's rare, but there are definitely cases where we would like to test different environments, like different Ubuntu versions, and also the kernel, different kernel.
What is it that you wanted?
Or being able basically to have custom images or custom runners with custom versions of a specific distro, but I don't think this is something that's easily given, at least not for open source projects or the like. I mean, yeah.
I'm not sure. So I think that boils down to the same problem we have with the M1 and Arch64 things, which is that in GitHub, we can't have self-hosted runners securely. That might change. I forget if I concluded Code Builder could have secure runners or not. I didn't have to tackle self-hosted runners for Code Builder because they had an Arch64 runner. But it's more likely to work, given that there's a lot of just like, what AMI is this using on what hardware, and then magic happens. But I'm not totally sure. But if Amazon now has M1, effectively M1 EC2 nodes, then there may be a viable route. I should see what the pricing is on those.
I don't remember, but I've done that. I can check my notes on the channel.
I'll just look it up.
Yeah.
The internet usually can answer.
Yeah, I mean, it seems nice that I'm assuming there's someone we can contact if there's something wrong with CI, with Code Builder. I mean,
I doubt it.
Actions.
I mean, actually, I don't know. There's some Amazon people lurking on our Slack instance.
It cannot be worse than GitHub Actions. We basically have zero support.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thankful we managed to get GitHub to comp our account, but I feel like they only did that to get me to stop emailing them every month. So who knows? Where are you hiding? I don't yet see the M1 pricing. Maybe I'll stop looking at this. They have a lot of acronyms, and none of them are the one I want. Please no. You think you get if you search for Amazon Apple Silicon. You do not get AWS EC2 nodes. You get headphone cases being sold on Amazon Marketplace.
Maybe they're not generally available. The Mac one, the EC2 page says it's Intel i7, 32 gigs, dedicated host.
If I remember right, Mac Stadium is $70 a month, though you mentioned that they often cut deals for open source.
Yeah, at least from their Twitter, previously they've been pretty. They had like a Kubernetes project, and they were like supporting some Kubernetes forks or offshoots or orchestration systems.
Mm-hmm. So I run some Mac Stadium nodes for Collide. They're a little weird around the edges. Not in a bad way, just in a not quite what you expect way. And I think this is fundamental to macOS and not, right? So if you think of like a Linux container, it's really used to being containerized. You bring it up, SSH is first party, and you know how to like create a user, right? You can SSH in, you create a user, you have a startup script. In macOS, there's like no way to create a user without using a GUI. There's like the instructions for how to create a user from the command line is like 7,000 commands long, and like sketchy scripts people have been sharing on Jamf Nation. So you sort of just like run into these weird bits where like they have given you a Mac that has like remote login turned on, and then there's a lot of like how you make it do what you want is left up to you.
There is no like standard image to use, or
well, it's a standard image. It's just it's more like a Mac and not like a cloud node.
Like a workstation, like a user.
Yeah, you have access to everything. Yeah, the UI. So
Yeah, they don't believe in multi-user. If another user wants a machine, you have to buy another machine.
That's a reasonable business model
Exactly.
for them.
Well, and it's also just what the like it's what the Apple OS is, right? They're like, here's an Apple OS. We didn't do very much to it, as opposed to like Linux, which is sort of much more natively works in like a minimal container EC2 node style thing. So anyhow, I think we are eventually going to have to make M1 CI work. I'm not excited about doing it, but I'm excited for the result of it.
What is the level of urgency for this project? Like, can it just keep running virtualized for indefinitely?
We have no M1.
Which-
Oh, do you mean Rosetta?
Yeah.
I think it's probably a bad idea.
Yeah, I think there might be some tables where you'll get like, virtual CPU information, and people have already been complaining about it. The other issue is Rosetta may not be present in 2 OSs down the line. Like similarly with the Monterey coming up,
Yeah.
OpenBSM is not going to be present. It was not supposed to be present in Big Sur, but they extended it. So
I could also tell you that every Big Sur release seems to remove Rosetta until a user clicks through.
Also, can you get endpoint security with Rosetta?
Yeah.
It does? Nice. Okay.
But I
there might be performance issues.
I assume Trail of Bits is motivated by some customer who would like it. But I tend to think that it's a thing we're going to have to do. I've always assumed we'll have to do it, and just, I don't know, never quite know how soon.
Makes sense.
Maybe it's worth evaluating what the other CI platforms are and saying like, okay, well, what if we moved away from GitHub? Like, we don't really love GitHub Actions. We thought it was easy. So are there other things? Like, what would it be like? Are there other ones? I'm not familiar enough with the space that would be either inexpensive or free for us as a project and had support for the platforms we wanted, or even just simpler ephemeral runners. I feel like that's maybe a good question. If y'all are currently researching it, having an answer to that would probably go a long way.
So with Max Stadium, one needs to apply for their program. If you're an open source project,
Well, I sort of want to, like, I'm happy to apply for their program and deal with getting those resources, but I don't want to do that if we're not going to use it. So
I just was looking at, what they provide to the team's open source community. So they provide one Mac Mini hosted in a US or European data center.
Yeah, I don't even know what CI vendors are currently building on M1, and maybe there's another sort of confusing thing of a lot of the things that people will give to open source projects for free are relatively low resources, and our build is hefty. So I don't know if there's things we can do to make the build better, build lower resource.
Yeah, although it is, again, I mean, it is a bit of work. It is possible. It is, again, what I was mentioning last time. We have to remove any a SQL query from the core, first of all, because that creates a dependency between tables and the core that then requires some specific flags to give and enlarges the test size, and yeah, that also impacts the size.
I mean, how much of it is just the third-party libraries?
So yes, there is also that. Well, yeah, like 4 GB alone are coming from the build of AWS, specifically the EC2 client.cpp. And yeah, there's also that together with that, there's also that route, yes, where you can pre-build. But yeah, I mean, as amount of work, they are similar, although, okay, one is maybe more on the build system side, the other one is more on the squared logic side, which, yeah.
I mean, ideally we would do both, but
it doesn't change. So, okay, well, okay, we don't change any more flags and libraries version too much. So yeah, anyway, we have to find, we have to have a storage where to put them though.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, boldly forward.
And I'll just also throw out there, if this needs to be solved with money, like Fleet is now donating $200 a month to the project, and I don't know if that covers it, but I suspect we will be able to continue doing that indefinitely and hopefully step it up at some point. I also have a feeling that if the project starts spending money on things that are useful to the project, we can reach out to other vendors and users and ask for donations. But right now, that our crowdfunding page says that we've received $2,000 and spent $0. So I think it's hard to justify donations much at this point.
Yeah, so the sad reality is I've actually spent a lot more than that, and I need to move our package downloads because Fastly has failed to comp service, and that's actually quite expensive for us. And by us, I mean
and Steph, I think I've been saying this for years now, but I think you should feel free to get reimbursed for any expenses you're taking on for the project. That's the reason why we're fundraising.
Absolutely. I'm just too lazy to do the paperwork. It's a terrible
Right.
reason. Terrible reason. No, there's no altruism here. There's just, I loathe it. As implied, though, at some point I am going to move the package hosting off of Fastly, and I am not sure where to yet. I may go back to Amazon because we at least have credit with Amazon right now.
Yeah, and Cloudflare, I think, has free bandwidth CDN.
Maybe. I haven't reached out to them because they're a competitor of an ex-employer, roughly.
Yeah.
Cloudflare might be an option. There's some other ones. I keep pondering whether we can shim it into our GitHub downloads, but I don't know. I don't know what I'll pick up yet. Maybe worth mentioning is there is one of the things that seems to happen is like new entities, some of them quite large, will basically just add our package repositories to their fleets. And the bandwidth hurts. There's a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the 90s when, like, you try and find some mirror for an open source project you cared about because they didn't have the bandwidth to maintain their own. So I don't know where all that's going to go yet, but anyhow, we can call the meeting. I'll update these minutes with some of this extra conversation. And okay. Anything else?
Cool. Thanks, Gal.
Okay.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day and week.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.